Salutations and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kidology and I make videos about everything and anything to do with modern society. There's been an astronomical 350% rise in commercial surrogacy globally in the last 12 years. And when it comes to commercial surrogacy, there are 3 points that I think are important for us to consider. Firstly, the rise in commercial surrogacy differs from and is distinct from traditional surrogacy. Gestational surrogacy means that the surrogate is carrying an egg of the biological mother. She is rather considered the carrier of the biological child of the biological mother and father. Therefore, she is known as a gestational carrier as opposed to a surrogate. For instance, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West's children, Chicago and Psalm, were born via surrogacy. Doctors had advised Kim not to become pregnant again after suffering placenta accretia during her last 2 pregnancies. "I hated being pregnant," the reality TV personality told the April 2018 issue of Elle. "But as much as I hated it, I still wished I could have done it on my own. The control is hard at the beginning. Once you let that go, it's the best experience. I would recommend surrogacy for anybody. I refer to her as a surrogate, but it's completely my and Kanye's DNA. So technically, that's called a gestational carrier. A surrogate is when they use the husband's sperm and the surrogate's egg," she explained. Secondly, there are no international treaties, regulations, laws, and standards regarding commercial surrogacy. Regulation is purely on a country-by-country basis, and in the United States, it is quite literally on a state-by-state basis, meaning that there is no federal law governing or prohibiting commercial surrogacy. Thirdly, the global commercial surrogacy industry and market grew to a whopping $14 billion in 2022. And what is most interesting is that by 2032, that is in 10 years' time, it is predicted that this market and industry is going to be worth a whopping $129 billion US. Now, why this projected really astounding growth? Well, it's due to lower fertility rates, especially in the West, but I would say that a large part of this has to do with, well, our modern culture, especially pop culture, and the culprits of this are, of course, celebrities. Remember when Brangelina and Madonna went to Africa and adopted brown babies? Celebrities who have recently opened up about using gestational carriers are the following: Rebel Wilson, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, Paris Hilton and her husband Carter Ruhm, Amber Heard, Anderson Cooper, and Lucy Liu. Now, I got interested in this subject due to a recent cover story of The Cut, which featured Lucy Liu. If you don't know, Lucy Liu is one of the Charlie's Angels, and she was also on a show called Endeavour. I watched a few episodes, but it sort of got a bit monotonous. I think the adaptations of Sherlock are getting out of hand. I found Lucy's case incredibly interesting because she is firstly a single mother and she decided to have a child via gestational carrier and surrogacy well into her 40s. A few years ago, she stated, that is gestational surrogacy, just seemed like the right option for me because I was working and I didn't know when I was going to be able to stop. I decided that was probably the best solution for me and it turned out to be great. Lucy's story to motherhood intrigued me, not just because of, well, the fact that she used a gestational surrogate, but I think because of the increasing publicity of motherhood, the increasing lack of a divide between the private realm of being a mother and parent to your individual child and the public realm, its rules, its regulations, it being a sort of spectacle involving many other people who are not within sort of the confines of a marriage or a relationship or a household. Celebrities announcing their pregnancies online, showing pictures of their children, and normal people and everyday individuals on social media publicizing their journeys, publicizing how they came to have their forever baby, etc. Motherhood is now a social and public venture. It is no longer within the confines of the home. And this, of course, emerged from the sexual revolution and the introduction of contraceptives as a commercial product for women to use, and ultimately the alleged liberation of women from the constraints of motherhood and pregnancy. But because I tend to be a bit more pessimistic than optimistic, I sort of see this as an example of where this venture, namely this rather, I would say, liberal feminist, third wave feminist venture, has gone into this sort of never-ending rut that I don't think we're going to get out of based on this route of things. The cut piece on Lucy Liu was for me a perfect example of where I think modern feminism has gone and the rut, the never-ending rut which it finds itself in. Namely, a belief that women's emancipation can be guaranteed via market-based principles, for example, commercial surrogacy or legalized prostitution or the right to sex, and or liberation from the female condition itself, that is, for example, from natural birth or via transhumanism. The cut piece focuses on Lucy's life as a rather bougie, multi-dimensional artist and her struggles as an Asian actress worth approximately $20 million. Meanwhile, since this time last year, surrogate mothers in the Ukraine have been relocating en masse to makeshift shelters. Pictures of surrogate-born babies being born and exposed to the world for the first time in makeshift shelters and basements in Kiev and all over the Ukraine are pretty harrowing. Due to the conflict, the gestational surrogacy market has been pushed into neighboring countries such as Georgia, where commercial surrogacy is completely legal and unregulated. But back to Lucy. In the cut piece, she described in more detail why she decided to give birth to her son via gestational surrogate. I didn't have a plan. I just thought I want to change the conversation a little bit. I didn't want to talk about the next project. I felt like I was reading the same script. I got tired of it. I didn't want the same dialogue. I'd heard myself say the same things many times and just thought, well, this can't be what's next. It wasn't enough. I didn't mull it over too much. I didn't do a lot of research. I just pulled the trigger. I can think myself out of something easily. If I think too much, I won't do it. It's better for me to feel something and just go for it. A lot of people read books about parenting. I didn't do any of that. I was like, when the child is here, I'm just going to figure it out. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where I think we need to have a very serious conversation about modern day feminism, whichever wave you want to call it. I don't really care at this point. I think they all sort of intermesh and merge into each other at this point. But I think that there is a very important conversation to be had around this idea of the personal being political or vice versa. To start this conversation, I think we need to look at countries where commercial surrogacy, or rather for-profit surrogacy, is legal relative to countries where surrogates, gestational surrogates, are in the highest demand. For-profit surrogacy is illegal in the vast majority of Western European countries. It's also interesting to see what countries beyond the West for-profit surrogacy is illegal. For-profit surrogacy is illegal in China and Japan. And this is very interesting, especially when we consider the demographic crises that China and Japan are in with regards to their aging populations. China's low fertility rate and the implications and consequences of the one-child policy, which is no more. Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia have also prohibited for-profit surrogacy. And these are all countries where women's bodily autonomy is quite lucrative, where there are clear gender divides, where patriarchal norms really resonate and dominate, and where traditional biological family values are strong. Now, the countries where there is the highest demand for gestational surrogates, that is where most agencies are based, where the most money is being made by these agencies, not, however, by the surrogates, are Georgia, especially since the advent of the Russian-Ukrainian war, Ukraine, Russia, and Mexico. Mexico has seen a substantial boom, especially since last year. Now, although some states in the US are surrogacy-friendly, all 50 states have prohibited commercial surrogacy. However, there is no federal-level regulation of gestational surrogacy, meaning that if a family or a parent or prospective parent is able to afford a family lawyer, they can pay to get around the law. There is therefore, for this reason, high demand in the US, and also just because of the ease of access and being in the same country as your prospective surrogate. However, relative to Georgia, the Ukraine, Russia, and Mexico, the US price of surrogacy is immense. In Georgia, Russia, and the Ukraine, the most that you will pay for a surrogate is approximately $40,000 to $50,000 US. In Mexico, commercial surrogacy programs cost about $60,000 to $70,000 US. In the United States, however, the average cost ranges from $120,000 US to $150,000 US. And this is ultimately where the term fertility or procreation tourism comes in. And this is where I want to circle back to my point about the personal being political or vice versa, a core tenet of second and third wave feminism. I think the issue that we are seeing increasingly more so today, and that we are really feeling the consequences and implications of, is that when anything becomes public, it really means that it is just being regurgitated into and by the market. Ethical and moral conversations take a hell of a long time to really get through to people and to come to a consensus about. In comparison, a doctor in LA, such as Dr. Brian Levine, can just start up a company, found a platform, and create a commercial market around surrogacy, or as he calls it, Bumble for surrogates. Moral conversations and reckonings really don't have enough time to catch up with the kind of publicity and ease at which the market can just overwhelm and subsume everything, including conversations and reckonings around surrogacy. And I think we can see this in the fact that we are actually still to this day having conversations, not just among the general public, but within the medical profession, about the ethics and the standards of traditional surrogacy. That is surrogacy that is done for altruistic reasons and that involves the egg of the surrogate being used. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists issued a public statement in May of 1983 outlining guidelines for surrogate mothers. This was its official statement on the issue in response to traditional surrogacy proliferating in the 1980s. Since then, it has really been up to private bodies, individuals, and non-profit organizations to regulate, or to rather self-regulate. But when it comes to ethics or self-regulation in a market-based industry and context, things get a little bit iffy. There was something very interesting that really stuck with me that Lucy Liu said in her The Cut interview this month. And I quote, "There isn't really a good time to do anything." When it comes to family planning, this seems to be the underlying motto of commercial surrogacy. Commercial surrogacy isn't about the children. Now, I know adoption and fostering are very different to surrogacy, but I think there is sort of an underlying tenet that resonates with both of them, or all three of them. That is, it's all about the parent. It's all about the customer. It's all about them, and it really is not about the child. And sometimes this can work out, and I'm sure in many cases of adoption, it has been incredibly successful, especially when it comes to being adopted into a family that is the same race as you, that really doesn't look different to you or act differently to you, and is really upfront and honest about things. But I really think that in all of this, babies are turning into a commodity, and they are a commodity which a parent can demand whenever they want, whenever it is more convenient or most convenient for them and their life and their lifestyle. And for some women, this is incredibly liberating, especially for very wealthy Western women. And I think increasingly in the United States, commercial surrogacy is going to look incredibly appealing to women. Relative to the rest of the advanced, rich world, the US doesn't have paid maternity leave. Postpartum recovery and depression needn't be covered or considered by employers. Now just imagine the appeal of getting out of that. Spending about as much on a surrogate as you would on hospital fees and bills, without having to go through depression, without having to go through the loss of your body without having to go through 9 months of potentially life-threatening, agonizing, and exhausting pregnancy. You can keep going to work, you can keep making money, and ultimately your family is made without you having to go through the real brunt of, well, motherhood. You can keep working, you can keep contributing to the economy, which is ultimately what the country wants, rather than the socio-economic framework and environment catering to mothers and natural motherhood. Instead, well, the market can just resolve everything. And the rather dystopian reality of this is highlighted by the feminist and journalist Mary Harrington, who recently published an incredible book, which I think everybody should read, called Feminism Against Progress. And this is what she had to say about transhumanism that I think applies very perfectly to this.
I think what happens when we try and emancipate ourselves from human nature via technology is that it just comes back in cartoon form via the market, or it comes back in cartoon form via some unexpected means. In a sense, we can't evade our fate. You know, there's and I think that fundamental. To me, there's a tragic quality to that, which we just have to embrace and we have to lean into. You know, the sort of the human condition is, in a sense, a tragic one, and trying to argue our way out of that via technology, you know, is hubris, which, you know, as the Greeks would suggest to us, you know, from a long time ago, ends up with nemesis.
And in all of this, there is this underlying tenet of the market, which is that the customer is always right. The customer is always to get what they pay for, and that in being a customer, you are absolved from many a moral and ethical responsibility and consequence as a result of being a customer. And this is why I think that children are really not being considered in any of this, or are not being considered as thoroughly as they ought to be. Take Carter Reum, Paris Hilton's husband. Carter and Paris welcomed their son via gestational carrier in January of this year. Now, what I found interesting is that Carter already has a child, whom the media have called his love child, a 10-year-old daughter. He financially supports her, but otherwise has only seen her once in her entire life. Now, this is all taken from tabloids and celebrity gossip magazines, so please take from this what you will. But I do think that the sort of general consensus among them speaks to something that is important to talk about nonetheless. According to spokespersons, his daughter has been triggered by the recent media spectacle around Paris and Carter's son and his birth. This little girl has a baby brother who she likely will never meet or actually have a part in his life. Now, as somebody who was separated from her brother from age 10, I resonate with that, and I really resonate with this idea that children are really not considered in any of this, and that the well-being of children, of their own identity and self-awareness, their own projection in life of who they are and discovering themselves, is completely ignored. The trauma and guilt that I feel about my brother is honestly something that I think really resonates with many children who are adopted, are fostered, and I think increasingly those who are going to be born via surrogacy. And considering the mental health crisis that we already have in the modern world today, imagine the mental health crises that we are going to be having with children and young people who are now not even biologically born to parents who don't have an understanding of their identity and where they come from. I think this is a very important conversation for us to all be having. I think this is a vital conversation for us to have as a society and collectively. And I think this is just the perfect conversation to have around this idea, which I really am a proponent of, this idea that the personal really is not political, especially when it comes to the political or the public being absorbed by the market rather than being absorbed into moral reckonings, into ethical conversations, into consensual conversations between groups, because the public or politics is all about animosity, it's all about conflict, it is all about winners and losers. It isn't about building consensus, it isn't about moving forward beyond that of moving forward according to what I believe is right for everybody, moving towards some utopia. And at this point in time, I think that the utopia that is being offered by gestational or commercial surrogacy is more of a dystopia. utopia. And I think we are going to see that increasingly, especially when it comes to the children of these arrangements. But please let me know your thoughts. I'd be very, very interested to hear what you think. Thank you very much, as always, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one.